If my legs lock up here, it's because I've been in a car for the last 3.5 hours driving down from Santa Monica. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State has nothing to do with a 405. I really wish it did. So my name is Pete Peterson. I am running for Secretary of State, and let me, before I get into my remarks, just clear out 3 objections or questions that I usually get as I've been speaking around the state. Number 1, my real name is Pete Peterson. Okay, a lot of people wonder if that's real. It's a Norwegian thing. Ever since the first Pete Peterson came to America in the mid-1850s, the first male-born son of every Peterson generation has been named Peter, and that curse and blessing has fallen upon me. Number 2, I'm a Republican from Santa Monica. This is what one looks like. You don't see many of them. As I like to say, whenever I leave the city boundaries, the population of Republicans in Santa Monica goes down by 25%. And when my wife and I are in the car together, it goes down by 50%. Our 2-year-old baby girl, who we adopted 2 years ago, we're still not sure. She likes a lot of stuff for free, so we're never quite sure where she is leaning there. And number 3, I really want to be your next Secretary of State. Now, it's this last point that I usually get the most questions about, because as I have had a chance to speak around the state, most of the audiences I speak to, they've never met anybody who wants to be Secretary of State. They want to be something after Secretary of State. Or they're terming out of an office and they just want a soft place to land in the Secretary of State's office. But as I'll get into here in a couple minutes, much of my professional career has been in training for this office. And the Secretary of State office, to me, is really a dream job for reasons that I'll get into here in a couple seconds. So I want to frame my remarks this evening in 2 ways, and I understand that I've been given 2 hours to speak tonight. Is that right? I mean, see, I teach a 4-hour class at Pepperdine, and so this is already condensing down my usual time allotment. So I want to frame my remarks in 2 ways. One is, why Secretary of State, and why me? So first, why Secretary of State? Now, you all are very engaged, and unlike many audiences that I speak to, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, understand what the Secretary of State does. But I want to make sure, as we communicate this out to others, this movement around my run, the importance of this office. I was speaking at an event up in Solvang about 3 weeks ago, and someone came up to me before I had a chance to speak and said, "Pete, I hear you're running for Secretary of State. What's your opinion on the Arab-Israeli conflict?" And I had to say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm not running for that Secretary of State. I'm running for California Secretary of State." So we understand that the Secretary of State of California has 2 major responsibilities. Number 1, they are the state's chief elections officer, right? They certify all the signatures for all the ballot initiatives. They essentially write the ballot information packet that is sent out to all the voters. They qualify all the ballot initiatives. They certify all the elections, right? So if you care about issues related to ballot integrity, the Secretary of State office should be the most important office that you think about. Second, and very importantly and not always thought about, the Secretary of State is also the chief business registrar for the state. So if you're a small business owner, the first person you see when you start up a business here in California is the Secretary of State when you file your papers either as an LLC or a sole proprietorship or an incorporation. And the last person you see when you leave the state and file your papers of dissolution is that same Secretary of State. So how are we doing in those 2 areas? First, in election administration. The nonpartisan Pew Center on the States just last year created a report, and I invite you all to look it up. It's called the Election Performance Index, EPI, in which they ranked all 50 election systems for each one of the 50 states on 12 different criteria, from voter turnout to how you count absentee ballots. California was ranked 48th out of 50 states in our election administration. You might know that California is the last state in America not to have a statewide voter database. Now, why is that important? You know, we really don't have a good idea how accurate our voter roll is statewide. Now, I would say, and I've had the great opportunity to meet with Neil Kelly, who's the Orange County registrar. I think that some great work has been done here in Orange County to make sure the voter roll is up to date. But as you go county by county, we are the last state in America not to have a statewide voter database. Now, I was watching the live stream of a State Senate testimony yesterday with our illustrious current Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen, trying to explain why we don't have one. And next to her happened to be the Chief of Elections for the state of Colorado. And the question was asked to the Chief of Elections for Colorado, when you started and created your statewide voter database, and you went from just doing it at the county level to the state, what did you find? And that chief elections officer for Colorado said, we found 1.8 million out-of-date voter files. We're like 5 times the size, 4 times the size of Colorado. And we really don't have a sense as to how accurate our voter roll is. It's not as if we don't have the money. You know, money was allotted by the federal government after the Bush v. Gore election in a federal piece of legislation called Help America Vote Act, HAVA, as it's known by its acronym, and every state was given money to create this statewide voter database. California was given $380 million, $100 million of which was designated specifically for the creation of a statewide voter database. That was 10 years ago, and we still don't have one. Now, we don't want to rush into things. And so last year, the Secretary of State actually chose a vendor to create the statewide voter database. And I want to put you all at ease that the Secretary of State has chosen a vendor to build our statewide voter database. They were awarded the contract in 2013 for $98 million. The name of the company happens to be CGI. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? CGI is the company based in Canada, which of course we don't have any technologists in California. It's not possible we could have found somebody in California with a technological expertise to build a statewide voter database. CGI is the company that built healthcare.gov. And this is the company that we've awarded a $98 million contract to build our statewide voter database. How are we doing on business registration? Well, if some of you had followed the news over the summer, the Sacramento Bee reported that the Secretary of State had a 6-week backlog in new business filings. And now they're very excited about the fact that they've got it down to 2 weeks. You know, in other states, when I told a friend of mine who's an accountant that I was running for Secretary of State, he said, Pete, we have to meet. I have to tell you how difficult it is to work with this Secretary of State. And what he told me was, Pete, when a client comes to me and wants to start up a business here in California, we start the paperwork with Sacramento, and then we go online with the Nevada Secretary of State just so that client can file and register the business that day and open a business checking account that day. You know, other states roll out the red carpet to business, especially small businesses. We roll out the red tape. And not only do we make it difficult to start a business, we make it expensive. Now, this is the only reason my wife wants me to run. She happens to be the owner of a small LLC, a graphic design firm, and I remember this as if it were yesterday. At the dinner table, she's writing out the $800 check to the Secretary of State office, which you have to write every year annually just to have an LLC in this state. You know, that's 4 times as much as most any other states in America. And nobody knows where this money goes. I've been looking. I've had a state finance expert at Pepperdine. My day job is at Pepperdine. Try to take a look and find out where this $800 a year goes to, and we can't find anywhere in the state budget where this money goes to. So why am I running? 10 years ago, my wife and I made the financially stupid decision to leave a very comfortable career in printing and graphic services. That's my background. That's what I did for about 12 years, to pursue a passion of mine, because I came to a place about 10 years ago where I really felt in my heart that the relationship between government and citizens is fundamentally broken. And it's not going to be healed from the outside or from the inside. It's only going to be healed from the outside. And so we left that career. I went back and got my master's in public policy at Pepperdine. And from that decision on, first as was mentioned before, heading up, as John said, a bipartisan organization called Common Sense California, where our tagline, I like to say, is our name is not an oxymoron. For the last 4 years, I've headed up something called the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement at Pepperdine. And even though I do teach a class there to master's students, 90% of the work I do is outside the classroom, training government officials to do something they're not very good at. And that is engaging and involving the public in making local decisions. Just yesterday, I was up in Benicia training a group of about 30 government officials to do something, again, they're just not comfortable with, and that is thinking and understanding that the public might have better ideas in how to solve problems than they do. Last week, I was down in Soledad doing the same thing for about 35 public sector officials in southern Monterey County. Again, what I'm seeing around the state, and as John said, I've worked in some very interesting places over the last 7 years of doing this work. Bell, Vallejo, Salinas, Riverbank, Modesto, incredible places where you wouldn't believe that civic engagement was going to be the answer. I've seen incredible things happen. In Bell 2 years ago, I was part of a process. I was on the consulting team with several other officials, their new city council that was brought in, to lead their first public budgeting process that they've ever had in that city. And if you go to the Bell website today, and I invite you all after this evening, if you want to see the power of citizenship, go to the Bell website at cityofbell.org. And in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a starburst graphic with an A- grade in it. That grade is handed out by a group out of DC called the Sunlight Foundation. And the A- ranking is for the city's transparency in budget processes. That city today, I know we don't hear this story very much. We heard the old story, right? And now some of these cases are going to court, and we're hearing that story about what happened 5 years ago over and over again. You haven't heard what's been happening there in the last 2 years. Citizens have risen up in that city out of embarrassment for what they hadn't done for the last 5 years to take back their city. I have worked with that city for a couple years now, and one of the things I think I've learned from that experience is it wasn't just public sector officials that were holding citizens out. You know, I think one of the interesting side stories of that is the nickname, this was reported in the LA Times, the nickname for City Hall in Bell by the residents of Bell, who are Bellians, by the way. That's what residents of Bell are called. That city, by the way, also developed by the same person who developed Bel Air. It's a little California history. Much different cities, by the way, Bel Air and Bell. The nickname for City Hall was the Kremlin. That's what Bellians had described their city hall as. And I'm not going to say Sacramento and the capital is like the Kremlin, but I would argue that we as Californians don't feel very involved or engaged by our state government. And I'm here to tell you that this relationship between government and citizens is fundamentally changing, not just around California, but around the country. And it should be the job of the Secretary of State, not just to make sure the voting machines work, although that is a big job, and I don't think we're doing a great job of that, but to be someone who I'm framing this as being the chief engagement officer for Californians and California businesses. Because I think somebody inside government needs to care about what people outside the government know about the decisions we're being asked to vote on. And it's been my experience over the last 7 years of working in some very difficult places that this is a doable thing. Technology is coming on board that will allow us to be much better engaged, not only in participating, but understanding and seeing how our government is spending its money. You know, this area of transparency and technology. I've worked with several cities in using a platform called OpenGov, which for the first time has opened up city budgets to the public in a way that they can actually understand how their tax money is being spent. This is where government is going. It is no longer going to be feasible for a city like Bell to operate without the visibility and transparency and engagement of their citizens. And I would argue that here in California, this is where this state is going. And I'm running for Secretary of State to be that chief engagement officer for all Californians. So I'll just close with 3 points. And it's the 3 reasons I'm hoping you might get involved in this campaign. Number 1, the Secretary of State is a very important office. You know, not a lot of people even know we have a Secretary of State. Maybe some of your friends don't know we have a Secretary of State. But if you care about the integrity of your vote, you need to care about this race and who sits in that office. Number 2, this is a winnable race. There is no incumbent in this office. That incumbent, Deborah Bowen, is thankfully terming out. And right now, there are 6 declared candidates for this office. We just had our first debate last week. We just got the video. We're going to post that video to our Facebook page. I want everybody to take a look at it to see how I did against my 5 opponents. I am the only Republican in this field. And finally, and the last point, you might know that Pepperdine has a rather unique relationship with the Reagan Library. Actually, Pepperdine as a university had a very unique relationship with President Reagan. But I've had the great opportunity to speak at the Reagan Library. I actually spoke at their Constitution Day celebration last year about the importance of citizenship. And I happen to know the executive director of the library, a guy by the name of Duke Blackwood. And a couple months ago, I was at an event at the library, and I saw Duke, who was always nattily dressed. He had this great jacket on, and on this plaid jacket, he had this incredible lapel pin. Now, I don't usually go in for those things, but this lapel pin was just, it was a work of art. And so what the pin was a gold outline of California, about this big, a gold outline of California, and in black letters right down the center, it said Reagan. And I said, Duke, you know, I'm not much of a kind of a accoutrement guy, but that is one cool lapel pin. And Duke said, you know what, Pete? If you win this race, you get this pin. So it's an important office. It's a winnable race, and I want that pin. We've got envelopes in the back and opportunities for you to get engaged in the campaign. The website is petesos.com. Thanks so much for considering me in this race and for your time this evening. And I guess we have a couple minutes maybe for questions, I don't know. So I certainly welcome any questions you might have. Yeah.
During every presidential year, all of the political parties can either allow no party preference people to vote in their presidential primary.
Yes.
And the Democrats allow non-party preference people, and the American Independent Party allows. So what's wrong with the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think that there has been some Operation Chaos talk about some things that have happened in other states. I think they should be allowed to participate. Obviously, we're now, and I'm sure we all understand this, we're now in a top 2 primary situation. So even though I am the only Republican, I'm one of 6 candidates. And so with the top 2 and the ability of no party preference voters to vote and participate in the primary, I think it's just a matter of time before Republicans are going to allow that as well. I mean, I think the growth in the no party preference designation, which is not independent, by the way, we understand that. The research on the no party preference voting block, actually Caltech did a great study on this last year, is the no party preference block actually mirrors the general electorate. So there are a lot of people that don't think the Democratic Party is liberal enough. They're in no party preference. There are people, maybe some folks in this room, that don't think the Republican Party is conservative enough. They're in no party preference as well. So, yes, Tom.
Would you like to comment on AB 1266, the initiative that, as I understand it, had something like 150,000 extra
Yes.
signatures,
Yeah.
but is being held up by the Secretary of State, and that's just another point on how important that job is.
Right. So that is ridiculous. I actually have commented on that before. The power of the Secretary of State to certify signatures, or qualify signatures, and what she did in 1266 was just inside Sacramento politics. A couple other things, though, that have also happened. Second, maybe some of you know that the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association sued the Secretary of State just over a year ago because the Secretary of State had used really kind of an inside Sacramento method to number Prop 30 at the top of the ballot order. The Secretary of State was found by the Third Circuit to have unconstitutionally numbered Prop 30. Prop 30 should never been at the top of the ballot order. And the Secretary of State, again, to demonstrate the power of the office as it relates to the initiative process, numbered that ballot initiative in such a way that gave it a higher chance of passing. Another thing, and I wrote a piece on this recently in Flash Report, I have proposed that the Attorney General should no longer have the power to write the title and summary of ballot initiatives. I'm not sure if some of you have followed the Chuck Reed pension initiative that he's proposed for this year, but the Attorney General, in ways that, to me, are absolutely mind-blowing, used specific market-tested words in describing the ballot summary, what you see when you walk into a voting booth and you read what you're voting on. In that paragraph, she used market-tested words that essentially will sink the possibility of pension reform passing here in California. So I propose that we have a citizens commission, that we draw a sample of citizens together to help write that initiative. I've seen something like this work in Oregon, and I would like to see something similar here in California. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Excuse me. You're talking about what? About this voter, no party thing on it.
Right.
How about going to the IRV method of voting? You familiar with that one?
Yes, I am.
That seems to me like the best one I've ever heard of.
Yes. I have thought about this quite a bit. I worked on a project, actually, that was a statewide public engagement process that we essentially asked California voters their feelings on IRV, and with the trade-offs implied, I still think it needs to be one vote per candidate.
The thing I like about it
Is it solves it in one race.
it eliminates not only a runoff election,
Yeah.
potentially could eliminate the need for a primary and general election.
Yes.
Look at the millions of dollars that would save the government
Yeah.
and the candidates to
Yeah.
have one election.
Yeah.
And the winner is truly the one that is most desirable by the most number of people.
Yes.
I love it when you can see how it works.
Yeah.